Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into quite a world, one where immortality isn't this amazing gift, it's actually this grotesque parasitic curse.
Yeah, it's pretty intense stuff.
And we're also looking at an era where samurai, the iconic warriors, are facing this deep existential crisis because, well, peace broke out.
Strange problem for a warrior to have, right?
Exactly. So we are unpacking Hiroki Samura's incredible manga series, Blade of the Immortal, that's Mugen no Jinin in Japan, and also its really well-regarded 2019 anime adaptation.
Both are fantastic source material.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're drawing on some in-depth lore analysis, looking at excerpts that just brilliantly mix this hyper-violent action with really solid historical realism and, well, some seriously unsettling supernatural body horror.
It's a unique blend, for sure.
So our mission today, what we really want to do is pull out the key insights into the absolute core concept of Blade of the Immortal, the sort of quasi-biological immortality granted by these things called Kessenchu.
The sacred bloodworms. Even the name is evocative.
It really is. We'll dig into how they work in the story, their origins in Japanese history and folklore, which is fascinating, and how Samura just masterfully uses this concept to drive the plot, the characters, and some really deep themes.
Get ready for some surprises, some aha moments maybe. It really makes you rethink immortality and atonement.
Definitely. Okay, let's dive in. The core concept, this pseudo-biological reality of immortality.
Right, and what's so striking, as you mentioned, is how it's not just waved away as magic. The Kessenchu are presented right off the bat as this ultimate life-extending technique.
Originating from a Lama monk, wasn't it?
Exactly. Not some vague spell. It's framed almost like a lost science or maybe an esoteric biological process. It grounds everything in this visceral, slightly disturbing way. It's an infestation, really.
So less fantasy, more body horror sci-fi almost, even though it's historical. How do they actually work, these Kessenchu? What's the micro-level detail?
Well, they're described as these microscopic, worm-like organisms.
Yeah.
And the key thing is they create these focal points, Kessenki they call them, or Kessen bases, all through the host's body.
Okay, like little nests?
Sort of, yeah. And these bases are constantly producing more worms. So when the host gets injured, sliced, stabbed, whatever, the worms just flood out through the arteries to the wound site.
And then what?
They basically act like a super glue and living filler. They substitute the destroyed tissue, bind the wound edges together incredibly rapidly.
Yeah. They
can even, reattach a completely severed arm if you hold it in place.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. And that detailed, almost clinical explanation is what makes it so unsettling. It's not clean magic. It's this messy, parasitic symbiosis. It's grotesque.
Yeah, grotesque is the word. It grounds it, makes it feel disturbingly real within the fiction. But like you said, absolute immortality would be narratively, well, dull. There have to be limits, right? Vulnerabilities.
Oh, absolutely. And those limits are crucial for the story's tension. It's not total invincibility. For example, the worms can patch things up, but they can't regenerate huge amounts of tissue out of thin air.
So if the limb is completely obliterated,
it's gone. It won't just regrow. You need the physical part there for the worms to stitch back on. Massive tissue loss is a real problem.
Okay, so there are still stakes. You can't just tank any kind of damage.
Precisely. And the host can also be overwhelmed if the damage is too massive, too widespread, happening all at once. Like a huge explosion.
Too much for the worms to handle simultaneously.
Yeah, potentially. And crucially, complete decapitation. That's game over. The head needs to be connected for the system to work, presumably.
The definitive off switch.
The definitive off switch. But maybe the most interesting vulnerability, from a story perspective, is the Kessensatsu, the bloodworm killer.
Okay, that sounds ominous. An antidote. How does that work? Especially thinking about someone like Manji, who's got centuries of violence behind him.
It's incredibly brutal. The Kessensatsu isn't just a poison that kills the worms. It specifically targets the binding agents they use.
Ah, so it undoes their work.
Exactly. But here's the horrific part. It causes all the host's previous wounds to reopen, sequentially, starting from the most recent one and going backwards in time.
Wait, all of them?
All of them. Every single cut, stab, broken bone, everything the worms ever healed just bursts open again. Imagine the agony, literally reliving every injury you've ever suffered.
Oh my God.
For Manji, it's forcing him to physically re-experience his entire violent past, his sins made manifest on his body. It's a profoundly karmic weapon.
That's an incredible narrative device, turning his immortality, his greatest strength, into this source of unbearable agony. And speaking of the host, can this condition be passed on, or is it locked to one person?
It can be transferred, but again, it's not simple magic. It's presented almost surgically.
Surgically.
Yeah, you need to graft an immortal limb onto someone else who has a compatible blood type.
Yeah.
The Kesenki, the bases in that grafted limb, will then start producing worms for the new host.
So you get a piece of immortality, literally.
Pretty much.
Right.
But it's noted to be a weaker, temporary version. It seems dependent on that grafted part remaining functional. But yeah, it becomes a huge plot point later, especially with the villain Shira. It brings him back in a horrifying way.
Right. Okay, stepping back a bit, this whole concept, the pseudo-biological immortality, it must completely reshape the world it exists in. The story's set in the mid-Tokugawa shogunate, right? A time of enforced peace and very rigid social structures.
Yeah, very controlled society.
So Manji's ability starts as a secret. How does things change when the secret gets out, particularly when the Ituri find out?
It's a total game changer.
Yeah.
At first, it's his ace in the hole, gives him a massive tactical edge, but then Magatsu, one of the Ituri guys, survives fighting him and figures it out.
And tells the others.
He does. And suddenly, Manji isn't just this really tough Ronin anymore. He's this anomaly, a strategic puzzle they have to solve differently. His enemies start approaching him in completely new ways, and he becomes this figure of intense interest, even fear. It really escalates the stakes.
Which leads to the inevitable question, what happens when the state gets wind of this? A technology, essentially, that could change warfare.
Exactly. And that's where Hibaki Kagemura enters the picture. He's this ruthless shogunate official, and he sees the Kesenchu not as some curse or weird phenomenon, but purely as revolutionary military tech.
He wants to weaponize it.
He wants unkillable soldiers.
Yes.
He sees the potential immediately.
And this leads into some really dark parts of the story, doesn't it? Manji gets captured, the experiment.
Yeah, he's taken to this underground prison, and they basically start vivisecting him, trying to figure out how the immortality works, how to replicate it. It's genuinely gruesome and has echoes of real-world atrocities like Unit 731.
So his personal curse becomes this potential state asset. The Kesenchu go from being his problem to being this incredibly disruptive technology threatening the stability of the Tokugawa peace.
Precisely. It's a logical, if horrifying, step for a regime obsessed with control. They want to understand it, contain it, and ultimately exploit it. This very pragmatic, almost scientific yet brutal approach. It actually ties into the series' aesthetics, too.
Ah, yes, the art style. Hiroaki Samura's manga art is so distinctive. It's got that rough, sketchy look, heavy pencil lines, but the anatomy is incredible. How does that style connect thematically?
It's brilliant because it's not just style for style's sake. It feels deeply connected to Manji's condition. His whole existence is about being broken, literally dismembered, and then imperfectly put back together, almost sketched back together by the worms.
So the visible pencil work is like scars on the page.
Exactly. It mirrors his perpetually damaged and unnaturally repaired state. It reinforces that his immortality isn't clean or perfect. It's rough, messy, constantly reminding you of the violence inherent in his life.
And the 2019 anime adaptation under Hiroshi Hamasaki managed to translate that feeling pretty well, didn't it? Using a different medium.
It really did. You can see the influence of 70s Japanese action cinema, lots of quick, sharp, almost staccato bursts of violence. Hamasaki himself called it cruel beauties on Kokubi. It captures that brutal, disjointed feel of Manji's existence cinematically.
And beyond the visuals, I remember the sound design being impactful.
Oh, hugely impactful. Crucial, really, for conveying the horror. You hear the tearing flesh, the snapping bones, but then you also hear this unnatural, wet, squishing, knitting sound as the wounds close. It's the sound of the Kesenchu doing their grotesque work. And Aiko Ishibashi's score is fantastic, really experimental. There's even a track titled Song of the Bugs, Mushi no Uta. It's like the worms have their own chilling soundtrack.
Wow, that really paints a picture, or a soundscape. Okay, so shifting gears slightly. Samura didn't just invent all this in a vacuum. He wove in real Japanese folklore and history. Let's talk about Yaobikuni.
Right, the ancient nun who curses Manji, essentially.
She's not an original invention, is she?
No, she's a direct lift from Japanese folklore. Specifically, the figure known as Hapiaku Bikuni.
Which means?
800-year nun. The core legend is pretty widespread in Japan. Usually it involves a young woman, maybe a fisherman's daughter, who accidentally eats the flesh of a ninyo, a Japanese mermaid or fish-like creature.
And that grants immortality.
It grants extremely long life, typically 800 years, and eternal youth. She stays young while centuries pass.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds Kind of appealing, eternal youth.
You'd think so. But the original folktales are almost always cautionary tales. They're profoundly sad.
How so?
Because the woman remains unchanged while everyone she knows and loves ages and dies. She wanders the land for centuries, marked by this perpetual loneliness and grief. The story is about the tragedy of outliving everything, the suffering it causes. It implies that a normal, finite life is actually far more precious and meaningful.
That's a really powerful message. So Samura takes this figure, this idea, but twists it significantly for Blade of the Immortal.
He really does. He keeps the core elements, the ancient nun, the burden of immortality, but changes the mechanics and the purpose fundamentally.
How does he change the mechanics?
Well, like we discussed, it's not a one-time magical meal anymore. It becomes this continuous parasitic infestation with the Kessenchu. That switch from pure magic to pseudobiology opens the door for all the rules, the vulnerabilities, the potential for scientific study within the story.
And the purpose? How does Yaobikuni change?
In the folklore, she's usually an accidental victim of fate. Samura transforms her into a conscious agent. She deliberately inflicts the Kessenchu on Manji. It's not random. It's a specific, almost karmic punishment for his past massacre, and importantly, for his arrogant desire to just die easily before truly atoning for what he did.
It turns a folkloric tragedy into a character-driven curse, setting up Manji's whole quest for redemption. Kill 1,000 evil men to earn back his mortality.
Precisely. It gives the immortality a specific narrative function tied directly to Manji's character arc.
That's brilliant layering. And speaking of layers, let's turn to the historical setting itself. Mid-Tokugawa shogunate. We mentioned the peace, the rigid society. What did that actually mean for the samurai class?
It meant an existential crisis, basically. This period, roughly 1603 to 1868, was over 2 centuries of relative stability enforced by the shogunate. No major wars.
Which sounds good, but for a warrior class.
Their entire reason for being vanished. Their skills weren't needed in the same way. Many became bureaucrats, administrators, or were just underemployed, even poor. Their martial skills often declined. They had the status, but their function was obsolete.
And ironically, this is the period when Bushido, the code of the samurai, really gets formalized, right?
Exactly. Gets codified, written down, heavily influenced by Neo-Confucian ideas about loyalty, duty, honor, self-sacrifice. It became this very idealized, rigid framework.
And the main antagonists, the Ichiri sword school led by Inatsu Kagehisa, they're positioned against this.
Directly against it. They represent a violent rejection of what they see as this decadent, formalized, impractical Bushido. Their philosophy is brutal pragmatism. Victory is everything. Technique is everything. Tradition and honor are secondary if they don't lead to winning.
So it's almost like a Darwinian reaction, trying to reclaim the warrior aspect in an age that doesn't value it.
You could definitely see it that way. The conflict in the series isn't simple good versus evil. It's dramatizing this real historical tension, this struggle for the soul of the samurai when their world had fundamentally changed. The Ichiri's ruthlessness is partly a response to the perceived stagnation and irrelevance of the traditional samurai way.
That historical context adds so much depth. It makes the duels about more than just swordplay. They're clashes of ideology rooted in a specific historical anxiety. Okay, so we've got the lore, the history. How does this all weave into the actual plot and characters? The Kessenchu aren't just background flavor.
No, they're the absolute engine. Take the Song of the Bugs arc you mentioned earlier.
Right, with Ikushizuma.
Yeah, another immortal, but one from the Sengoku period, the Warring States era, much more brutal. Shizuma represents the sheer weariness of living too long, but the conflict itself hinges on the immortality mechanics. Shizuma uses the Kessensatsu, that antidote.
The wound reopening poison?
Right. He neutralizes Manji's regeneration, turning his biggest advantage into agony. It forces Manji to fight differently, to actually fear injury again, confronting the limits of his supposed invincibility. It's a conflict only possible because of the specific rules of this immortality.
And the Demon Lair arc. You mentioned Manji's capture.
That whole arc revolves around his immortality being treated as a resource. His capture, the horrific experiments by the shogunate scientists, that's all possible because the Kessenchu are seen as biological, something that can potentially be understood, replicated, controlled.
And the resolution forces Renesano, his companion, into that tough spot.
Yeah, she has to make this incredibly difficult, morally gray alliance with some Ichiri members, her sworn enemies, just to rescue Manji. It shifts the whole narrative focus from her personal revenge story to this larger battle against state power, all triggered by the implications of Manji's unique biology.
It really shows how the core concept ripples through everything. And how does it shape the characters themselves, their journeys? Manji starts out pretty bleak.
Oh yeah, deeply cynical. A nihilist, almost. His goal is basically assisted suicide via combat, kill 1,000 bad guys to earn the right to die. His immortality has made him reckless, sloppy even. Why bother with defense if you can't die? He has endless time but zero purpose.
But traveling with Rin changes that.
Fundamentally, protecting her, seeing her vulnerability, her determination. It reminds him of his dead sister, Machi. It gives him something outside himself to focus on. He starts to see his immortality less as a curse to escape and more as a responsibility, a tool to protect the living.
And the manga's ending really drives that home, doesn't it? The epilogue.
It does, beautifully. We see him 90 years later, still alive, still enduring, and finding renewed purpose protecting Rin's great-great-grandchild. It shows that meaning wasn't just in atonement, but in connection, in continuing to help others across generations. His burden becomes his purpose.
And Rin's journey is almost the opposite in a way. She starts mortal, finite, but consumed by this all-encompassing desire for revenge.
Exactly. And traveling with Manji, seeing the sheer scale of violence, seeing him literally torn apart and put back together, it forces her to confront the reality, the cost, and the moral ambiguity of her quest.
She starts to see her enemies not just as monsters who killed her parents, but as complex people caught in their own circumstances.
Yes. Her perspective broadens.
Okay.
She moves away from just pure destructive vengeance towards a much more nuanced understanding of justice, violence, and forgiveness. Her final showdown with Anatsu isn't just about killing him anymore, it's a conscious choice about ending a cycle of hatred.
Their relationship becomes so central. The mortal girl gives the immortal man a reason to keep going, and his endless perspective gives her the space to grow beyond revenge.
It's a really powerful dynamic, a symbiotic relationship, narratively speaking.
Looking at the bigger picture, the themes, the series seems to offer a pretty sharp critique of that romanticized samurai image of Bushido.
Definitely. The Ichiri's brutal pragmatism, Manji's own dishonorable, anything-goes fighting style. They constantly expose how inadequate those rigid, idealized codes are when faced with the messy reality of life or death combat. It feels like a broader critique of any outdated ideology that doesn't adapt.
It also refuses easy moral judgments, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It consistently undermines any simple good versus evil framing. Rin learning empathy for her enemies, Manji trying to achieve atonement through mass killing, it constantly raises difficult questions. Can violence ever truly redeem? What does justice even look like in such a brutal world? It feels very modern in its moral complexity.
And perhaps the deepest theme comes back to immortality itself, the suffering of Manji, of Shizuma. It makes you question the desirability of living forever.
It strongly suggests that finitude, knowing that our time is limited, is precisely what gives life meaning. That's what gives our choices weight, our relationships value. Like director Hamasaki said, the real tragedy might be not being able to die, because death provides the ultimate contrast, the ultimate motivation for growth and appreciating the present.
It really taps into contemporary anxieties too, doesn't it? About life extension technology, about finding purpose in potentially much longer lives.
For sure, he uses this historical fantasy setting to explore very relevant existential questions.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really shows how Blade of the Immortal is this incredible synthesis. It takes Japanese folklore like Yaobikuni, mixes it with the real historical anxieties of the Tokugawa samurai, and blends it all with its own unique pseudo-biological invention, the Kessenchu.
And the result is something far greater than the sum of its parts, a really powerful, unique narrative.
Yeah. We've seen how immortality, something so often dreamed of, is presented here as maybe the heaviest burden imaginable. It really makes you ask, doesn't it? What actually gives life meaning?
And it's just piling up experiences? Or is it the connections we make?
Or is it knowing that it all ends? That finite time is what makes each moment precious.
It's a profound question to leave with. You know, as we pursue longer lives, maybe through technology or just healthier living, how does that potentially change our own sense of purpose? Does extending time dilute meaning or enhance it?
Something to definitely think about. A fantastic thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the brutal and beautiful world of Blade of the Immortal.
My pleasure. Lots to unpack there.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging beneath the surface.